Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Sanity's Cove YouTube channel. So if you enjoy hermeneutics, biblical interpretation, theology and culture, that sort of thing, please just hit the like and subscribe button and you can get more. But today we are talking about something I think a lot of people have thought about, and it's how to interpret Jesus's words in the Sermon on the Mount, where he talks about revenge and enemies and striking back, particularly in the area of pacifism. It raises all sorts of questions. One, should Christians own weapons? Should Christians own a gun? Should Christians be involved in self-defense? Should Christians serve in the army? Should Christians serve in the police force? If a Christian is attacked, should the Christian fight back? If a Christian woman is raped, should she try to resist her abuser? All these sorts of questions revolve around how we see and interpret this verse. So let me just read to you kind of the verse that often comes up in the heart of the discussion. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. Okay, you kind of read that and you're like, wow, that's... maybe we're used to that. Maybe we've grown up in church and we read that without even thinking about it. But if you think about it, the logical implications can be pretty extreme. And so sometimes you encounter people who interpret this in a radical pacifist way. In other words, they take it literally, with no sense of metaphor or hyperbole. And I've met, and there are people out there, Christians out there, there are ministers out there, they're ordained pastors, ministers, priests, who take this position of radical pacifism, that if you are a Christian, you cannot be in the police force, you cannot serve in the armed forces in any way, that by itself disqualifies you because you might have to use force against an evildoer. You might have to resist them. You might have to use either your hands or some sort of taser or a weapon, or maybe even, God forbid, a gun against a violent person. And Christians just don't do that. Christians, if they're being attacked, let the attacker do as they wish. And that is ultimate. Now, there are degrees and shades of that. Some pacifists wouldn't be as extreme as others. So you might meet a mild pacifist, or you might meet a pacifist who's fully consistent and it takes this one principle and applies it across the board. So what do we do with this? Is that an accurate reading of what Jesus said? If you are a Christian woman and if you are being raped by a non-Christian man, would the loving and godly thing to do would just be to let him do as he wants with no resistance? And when he's done, don't call the police, because the police would throw him in a jail cell. And, it's unloving to throw somebody in a jail cell. Is that really what Jesus was talking about? Is that what he was about? So, a few thoughts. One, I'm not convinced. I'm not fully convinced of that position. I'm not convinced that it's wrong for Christians to serve in the police or a job where they might have to use force. I'm not convinced that it's wrong for a Christian woman to resist if you're being raped, to try to slap and hit and kick and try to use some sort of force. If you're a parent, a father or a mother, and your children are being attacked, to use some sort of reasonable force to protect them. I think if you look throughout there's a couple reasons. One, let's look at the Bible as a whole. First of all, what does the Bible generally say about the use of force? Well, the Bible, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, gives the impression that Christians should be seeking to make peace with people. That even in the Old Testament, in Israel, God commanded Israel to try to offer terms of peace to the very often very hostile, very warlike countries around them. And so their command was to first offer peace, and if they were refused, okay, then, more violent means were permissible. But the first priority was to be at peace. And, when David had finally conquered and won his battles, it says God's blessing was on the country because they were at peace with their neighbors. And Solomon, son, for the majority of his reign, was very much at peace with the neighbors. And that was seen as God's blessing. So to be at peace with what could potentially be otherwise hostile people is a blessing. That was true in the Old Testament, and that carries through into the New Testament. Now, there's some difficulty interpretation between the Old Testament and the New Testament because in the Old Testament, God's modus operandi, his lotus, his focus, was actually a civil nation that had a government and politics and kings. And in the New Testament, it's focused on the church, which isn't an institution that has political authority or civil authority. We as the church don't have our own police force. We are a global movement that transcends nationality. And so there were some civil laws, like how to keep a police force and an army, that were very applicable to Israel, that do not apply so much to us in as functioning as the church. We have elders, we have deacons, we don't have snipers, so to speak, here within as in office of the church. I'm not saying a Christian can't serve in the military or the police. I'm just saying it's not our focus. It's not what we are called to do. It is not the mission of the church. Okay, so that's generally throughout the Bible. We offer peace, but there are times when you see when you're being attacked where it's appropriate, where it is right to use force. You know, when David killed Goliath, the writers of the Bible did not condemn David for doing so. They did not say, David, shame on you. You know, you shouldn't have done that. You know, you should have just gone and offered Goliath lunch, and maybe the two of you got along. And you know, it actually, the writer of the scriptures, whoever the author of 1 Samuel was, seems to have highlighted as an act of faith and God's blessing and presence with him. So the God of scriptures, if you start from Genesis to Revelation, I don't think you get the impression that that God always, in every way, is against using force and physical means to resist an attacker. But secondly, let's actually not just look at the Bible as a whole, but let's look specifically at this passage. First of all, is there anything in this passage? You kind of read this verse and you think, wow, taken literally. I mean, we just advertise. You can rob Christians, rape Christians, beat Christians, murder Christians, and we're not going to offer any resistance at all. You think, wow, every Christian house is going to be robbed. Every Christian woman's going to be raped. Wow. That's if applied literally. I guess the question is, if you back up just out of that immediate verse and look at the passage, what is Jesus teaching on here in Matthew chapter 5? Is Jesus in the verses before, the verses after, is Jesus using hyperbole or metaphor to make his point? Do we read it literally or metaphorically, or is Jesus using hyperbole, so to say, as a rhetorical device? Well, you kind of look at the passage and you think, if Jesus is speaking literally, wow, this whole section of not just this verse, but all of Matthew 5 is pretty intense. You know, Jesus says, you know, if you're kind of tempted to sin, chop off your hand, or, you know, if you're looking at something you shouldn't, pluck out your eyeball. Now, if you're going to take Matthew 5:38 literally, then you kind of have to back up and say, well, okay, if I'm going to be consistent, I need to take this whole section literally. And so if you're that, if you decide to interpret it in that sort of very literalistic way, are you consistent? I guess that's my question. To someone who's a total and complete philosophical pacifist, are you consistent? Do you still have your right eyeball? Do you still have your right hand? Now, of course, the problem is, you know, you look at someone lustfully and you pluck out your eyeball, but then you have your left eyeball, and then you look at them lustfully with your left eyeball. Do you pluck that out too? You sin with your right hand, but what happens when you sin with your left hand? You chop that off as well? Or is Jesus using hyperbole to make a point? I tend to think, based on the context of the passage, Jesus is using hyperbole, that he's using that as a rhetorical device. It's not quite like metaphor, but it's related to metaphor. Jesus is trying to make a point. Another thing to keep in mind is that we often miss the whole, don't worry, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other also. We might miss in Britain and America, when we read this, is that the cheek was the place where you expressed affection. And that's not the case in America or Britain. In the ancient world, and still in many Mediterranean countries, and in some ways countries around the world, you greet people not with a handshake or even a hug, but a kiss on where? Well, a kiss on the cheek. Mwah, mwah. You know, you do that French thing, or that Italian or Spanish or Latin American. There's many ways you kiss people on the cheek. It's when you offer someone your cheek, you're offering them friendship. And so the way I read it is, if someone is hostile towards you, you go to someone and you offer them a cheek, you offer them friendship, you offer them kindness, and they resist it. They're mean, they're nasty. What do? Do you be mean and nasty to them back? No. You offer them in the other cheek. You continue, in other words, you continue to offer friendship. This is not based on someone who breaks into your house at 3 in the morning and you're a parent and you're worried about your children. This is your long-term neighbor who you struggle to get along with, who every time you try to do something nice to them, they're grouchy back. And you know what? It would be easy just to be as mean back to them as they have been to you. Maybe it's someone in your neighborhood. Maybe it's someone in your church. Maybe it is someone in your family. Those natural enemies, the sort of enemies that come up at work. And, those people are always being mean to you. And in the long run, you want to just get them back. Jesus is saying, no matter how continually mean somebody is to you, you continue to offer them friendship. Is this really based on the passage? If you were to look at the verses before or behind, is Jesus really speaking about the military? Is there anything in the verses preceding this or after this that makes you think Jesus is talking about a police force? Or what a single mother should do if someone breaks into her house in the middle of the night? Or is the passage talking about how Jesus' community should operate and relate one another when relationships get difficult and how relationships can be compromised by sin? I think it's the latter. I encourage you to read it for yourself, examine the context for yourself. But that seems to be what it be. Now, just a quick question. Sometimes people ask, well, I live in a country where I can't own weapons. I can't own guns. I live in Britain, and I'm not too worried about that. A few things. One, I kind of live more in the countryside, and I'm not really worried about too many people attacking me with knives or guns or even breaking into my house. I mean, I have good locks and windows, and it's not so much a thing. But let's say you're a single mother and you live in London, or you live in another country where it is not legal to own a gun for self-defense. There are many other ways to deal with this. First of all, if you're in a country like Britain, you're not, as a man, I'm not too worried, because chances are if someone's breaking in my house, they don't have a gun either. Very few robbers here in the UK, and there's plenty of robbers. Breaking and entering, thievery, it's a big problem in this country. But very rarely do they carry a gun. Even on the black market, guns are really hard to come by here. And so if someone breaks in my house, I feel I'm a man in relatively good shape, and this is my home. And if someone breaks in, I'm going to go down there, and probably they'll be scared to have been caught, and they will run away, and that'll be enough. If it does come to a physical altercation, well, it depends on the size of the guy and how good a shape he's in. I'm in at least average shape, if not maybe slightly better than average shape. And so I feel with my own hands, I'm fine. But let's say maybe you're not in great shape. Maybe you're injured, or maybe you're a woman and you're afraid a man will break into your house. What are some things? There are a lot of practical things you can do. One person commented on my Facebook page. We're having a discussion about this, and was it a woman? I think it was a woman. They said something about having they have a high-powered water gun filled with pure lemon juice. As well as a high-powered flashlight. Like, this is the real high-powered stuff. So in the middle of the night, you shine one of these high-powered flashlights right into their face. It kind of blinds them, and you shoot that pure lemon juice right at them. Okay, that was one interesting idea. Another thing, here I have this in my house, up in my bedroom, just because maybe I'm a little bit of a safety geek, and if anyone broke into my house, instead of just fighting with my bare hands, this is high-powered wasp nest killer foam jet. I mean, and it's, kind of even shaped like a gun. I mean, you can't get mace in this country, but this is about the closest you can get. And it shoots far, and it shoots in a house. It's like a high-powered gun, and man, you don't even have to hit him in the face. Just get him on the shirt. This stuff is designed to take out an entire hornet's nest, and to shoot someone coming in through the window at a distance. Very good. Of course, if you have some muscle, you're a man, there's always things like a baseball bat or a cricket bat you can keep in your house there. Now, to be honest, if I was a single guy, would I have this stuff? Probably not. I wouldn't think too much about it. But once God makes you a husband and a father, he's told you to guard them. This is what God told Adam in the garden. The very first job given to a man, he said, I want you to go in that garden to cultivate it and to guard it. And as men, We feel that call. We want to cultivate our homes. We want to cultivate our families. If we have a business, we want to cultivate it, and we want to guard it. We want to protect it from evil. And so, ever since we started having kids, since I got married, but then even more since I started having kids, so there's a sense I need to make sure my wife is safe. I need to make sure, particularly my little children, are safe. And so I don't own a gun. I don't feel I need to own a gun. I don't feel like I'm lacking anything by owning a gun. But I don't live in a country surrounded by criminals who also own guns. So maybe if I lived in a country filled with criminals with guns, maybe I would feel differently. My bare hands and just a little bit of a few little tools and other things, I feel pretty safe at night. And I do not feel in any way that contradicts the fact that when I have relationships with people at work, at church, and in my neighborhood who are mean to me, nasty to me, I need to continually offer friendship in my interpersonal relationships when people are nasty and mean. I think that is the core of what Jesus is saying here. He's not saying, if you're a father, let people beat up your children and don't use physical force to get them off your children. I don't think that's consistent with the rest of Scripture. I don't think that's consistent with how Jesus or the apostles spoke to security forces and military personnel all throughout the rest of the New Testament. And I don't think it's consistent with how Jesus is speaking in the immediate passage. He's using hyperbole. He's using exaggerated speech. He's using metaphor to make a point. And when you take all that into consideration, yes, I think it's appropriate for a Christian man or woman to have whatever tools are necessary to guard either their own physical life or particularly if they're a parent, the people they are responsible for. But study the passage for yourself. As always, go to the Bible, not just one verse out of context, but look at the whole of the passage and how that fits in with the whole of the Bible. Thank you very much. This has been Sanity's Cove. If you've enjoyed this talk, please like and subscribe.